he said thank you. In the middle of the most violent firefight of his life, surrounded by enemies on all sides, shot in the back, bleeding out on an Afghan mountainside 10,000 feet above the world. He walked out from behind his only cover, stood completely exposed to incoming fire, picked up the satellite phone, made the call that saved his one surviving teammate, and before he hung up, through the roar of bullets and the thunder of explosions and the knowledge that he was going to die, he said thank you. That is who Michael Murphy was. That is the kind of man America produced. And that is the story you are about to hear. A story of a boy from Long Island who became a legend. A story of brotherhood, so deep it will crack something open inside your chest. A story of a man who walked toward death with his eyes wide open, not because he had no fear, but because his love for his men was bigger than his fear of dying. Let us begin at the beginning, because where a man comes from matters. It matters because it tells you who shaped him, who loved him, and what kind of world built the person he became. Michael Patrick Murphy was born on May 7, 1976, in Smithtown, New York, on Long Island. He grew up in a town called Patchogue, the kind of American town where people know each other's names, where kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on, where summer smells like sunscreen and fresh, cut grass, and where a boy with good parents and a good heart can grow up to be something extraordinary. His father, Dan Murphy, was a former district attorney of Suffolk County, a serious man with a deep sense of justice. His mother, Maureen, was the kind of woman who noticed the child sitting alone at the school dance and quietly pointed him out to her son. Michael had one brother, John, and the four of them made a tight, warm, loving family in that house on Long Island. From the very beginning, Michael was different in the way that only certain people are different. Not louder than everyone else. Not more aggressive. Not more dramatic. He was different because he was always doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. His father remembered coaching his little league team. When Michael was around 11 or 12 years old, Michael stepped up to bat in a championship game and hit a ball that sailed deep into the outfield. He rounded all the bases, slid into home plate, and his teammates swarmed him, screaming, "You won the game, you won the game." Michael shook his head. He was 11 years old, and he said, "I did not win the game. If you guys hadn't gotten on base, I would never have gotten up to hit. We won this game as a team." An 11-year-old said that. Some people spend their whole lives never understanding what Michael Murphy understood as a child. The nickname found him in middle school. There was a boy at school who had special needs, and some of the other kids decided he was an easy target. The way some kids do, when they want to feel powerful and do not yet know what power really means. Michael Murphy saw what was happening. He did not look the other way. He walked over, put himself between the bullies and that boy, and he made it stop. From that day forward, people in Patchogue called him Murph the Protector. It was not a joke. It was not ironic. It was exactly what he was. His mother remembered that if he saw someone standing alone at a school dance, he would walk over and ask her to dance. Not because someone told him to. Not because he wanted anything in return. Because he saw someone who needed to feel like they belonged, and he was constitutionally unable to walk past that without doing something about it. He was a tremendous athlete, playing soccer and ice hockey, running, swimming, pushing himself constantly. In high school, he took a summer job as a lifeguard at the Brookhaven Town Beach at Lake Ronkonkoma. He loved that job. He was good at it. He came back to it every summer through his college years. The same lake, the same familiar smell of sunscreen and summer water, the same steady watching over people who might need him. His childhood friend Owen O'Callaghan worked alongside him on that beach. Owen said later that when Mike said he was going to do something, you believed him. When he said he was going to become a Navy SEAL, you already knew it was going to happen. That was the kind of certainty that lived inside Michael Murphy. Not arrogance, not bluster, just a quiet, unshakable knowing of who he was and what he was going to do with his life. He graduated from Patchogue, Medford High School in 1994, and went to Penn State University that fall. And Penn State loved him. He played club ice hockey. He studied ferociously, graduating with honors and 2 bachelor's degrees, one in political science and one in psychology. He read constantly, not casually but deeply. His favorite book was Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield, the story of the 300 Spartans who stood at Thermopylae and held back an army so vast it darkened the horizon. He read Herodotus and Tolstoy. He had the kind of mind that wanted to understand everything, to know what people were made of, to understand why history moved the way it did and what made certain men stand up when everyone else sat down. His favorite saying was, "This education will set you free." He believed that completely. He was accepted to several law schools after graduating from Penn State. His father was a lawyer. The path was right there, clear and comfortable and safe. But on those long drives home from State College to Long Island, riding through the dark with his father for 4.5 hours down Interstate 80, Michael told his father what he actually wanted to do. He wanted to become a Navy SEAL. His father, a Vietnam veteran who knew what war cost, went quiet. He was not happy. He told Michael later that it was not because he had anything against the military. It was because Michael had everything going for him, every option open, and his father did not want him to choose a life of sacrifice. But his mother understood immediately. She said he was always someone who rooted for the underdog. He was always the person who ran toward the person who needed help, not away from them. Becoming a SEAL was not a departure from who Michael Murphy was. It was the fullest possible expression of it. He enrolled in SEAL mentoring sessions at the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, New York. He trained with obsessive dedication, doing push-ups and running miles in combat boots on the shore of that same Lake Ronkonkoma, where he had spent his summers as a lifeguard. In September 2000, he was accepted to the Navy's Officer Candidate School in Pensacola, Florida. On December 13, he was commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy. And in January 2001, he began basic underwater demolition and SEAL training, known as BDS in Coronado, California. BDS is not a training program. It is a dismantling program. It takes everything you think you know about your own limits and systematically destroys it. The cold water, the sand, the weeks without sleep, the instructors who are looking for the moment you decide to quit, the little bell you can ring any time to make it all stop. 196 men started with Michael Murphy's class. 28 finished. Michael Murphy was one of them. He went on to complete Army Jump School, SEAL Qualification Training, and SEAL Delivery Vehicle School. In July 2002, he earned his SEAL Trident, the gold pin worn on the chest that means you survived things most human beings cannot survive. He was assigned to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1 in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Over the next several years, he deployed to Jordan, Iraq, Qatar, and Djibouti. He served with quiet excellence, earning the respect of the men around him, becoming the kind of leader that other men would follow anywhere. There was one detail about Michael Murphy during his final deployment that tells you everything you need to know about who he was on the inside. He wore a patch on his uniform from FDN Engine Company 53, Ladder Company 43, a fire station in East Harlem. He wore that patch because a close friend of his had been killed on September 11, 2001. Every day Michael Murphy went out on mission. He carried his friend with him. He carried all of them with him. He always had. In early 2005, Lieutenant Michael Murphy was deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. He was 28 years old. He was leading men. He was exactly where he believed he was supposed to be. And in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan, in the province of Kunar near the border with Pakistan, history was already waiting for him. The mission was called Operation Red Wings. It was a reconnaissance mission designed to locate a Taliban commander known as Ahmad Shah, who led a guerrilla group called the Mountain Tigers. Shah was responsible for the deaths of numerous Marines in the region, and with Afghan parliamentary elections approaching, disrupting his operations was critical. The mission was vital, and Michael Murphy was going to lead it. Late in the night of June 27, 2005, a 4-man SEAL team was inserted by helicopter into the Hindu Kush mountain range at approximately 10,000 feet. The 4 men were Lieutenant Michael Murphy, the team leader, Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Dietz, 25 years old, from Littleton, Colorado, Petty Officer 2nd Class Matthew Axelson, 29 years old, from Cupertino, California, and Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Luttrell, 30 years old, from Houston, Texas. 4 men, 1 mountain, 1 mission. They moved through the darkness and took up their surveillance position. The Hindu Kush at 10,000 feet is not a place that forgives mistakes. The terrain is brutal, all near vertical slopes and loose rock and dense pine forests that drop away into 1,000-foot ravines. The air is thin enough to slow a man down. They moved carefully, professionally, doing what they had trained to do, watching the valleys below for any sign of Ahmad Shah and his fighters. Then, in the hours after dawn broke over those ancient mountains, 3 goat herders appeared. An old man and 2 younger ones, moving through the forest with their animals. The seals stopped them quickly and quietly. They searched them and found nothing. No weapons. No communications equipment. Just 3 Afghan men doing what Afghan men had been doing in these mountains for centuries. But the seals were now compromised. Their position was known. The question in front of them was a brutal one. What do you do with 3 unarmed civilians who now know exactly where you are in the middle of enemy territory? They argued about it. But Michael Murphy made the call. They let them go. They released 3 unarmed civilians because they were unarmed civilians. Because killing them was not something Michael Murphy was willing to do. Because the rules of engagement existed for exactly this reason. And because some things are worth protecting, even when protecting them costs you everything. Murph the Protector. They had called him since he was a boy. It was not just a nickname. It was a description of something so deep in his character that it never changed. Not even on a mountainside in Afghanistan with his life and the lives of his men on the line. The goat herders disappeared into the trees. The seals began moving immediately. And then, roughly an hour later, the mountain exploded around them. Automatic weapons fire opened up from multiple directions at once. The Taliban had found them. The attack was coordinated and immediate, with fighters pouring fire down at the seals from elevated positions above. The seals were outnumbered. They were outgunned. And every single one of them already knew, within the first few seconds of that firefight, exactly how bad this was, but they did not run. They returned fire immediately, moving and shooting, pushing down the slope, trying to break contact, trying to find any kind of cover in a forest that was disintegrating around them in a hail of bullets. All 4 of them were hit in those first terrible minutes. All 4 of them were wounded. And still they fought. They fought with the kind of ferocity that comes not from anger, but from love, the love of men for each other who have trained together and eaten together and been cold and exhausted and afraid together and know without a single doubt that they will die for each other if they have to. The problem was communication. The satellite phone was their only reliable link to the outside world. But in the canyons and ravines of the Hindu Kush, surrounded by ridgelines that blocked the signal in every direction, they could not get through. Every attempt to reach base ended in static. The mountain was eating their signal. And the Taliban were getting closer. Michael Murphy looked at the terrain around him. He could see a small clearing on a rocky spur below them, an open patch of ground with no cover, no concealment, nothing between a man standing there and the enemy riflemen on the slopes above. There was a line of sight to the sky from that clearing that might be enough to get a signal through. Getting there meant leaving the trees. Leaving the trees meant walking into the open. Walking into the open meant every Taliban fighter on that mountain would have a clear shot at him. He knew all of this. He knew it with perfect clarity. And he went anyway. He stood up. He moved out of the trees and on that open rocky ground. He raised the satellite phone. The Taliban opened fire on him immediately. Bullets came in from every direction. He stood in the open and he dialed. He got through to the Special Operations Quick Reaction Force at Bagram Air Base. And in a voice that witnesses described as completely calm, he gave them his unit's location, the size of the enemy force, and told them his men needed immediate extraction. He gave them everything they needed to know, steady and clear and professional, while the air around him cracked with incoming fire. He was shot in the back while he was talking. The phone fell from his hand. He picked it back up. He kept talking. He finished the call, and before he hung up, he said thank you. Shot through, bleeding, surrounded, dying on that mountain, he said thank you. Then he picked up his rifle and walked back to his men and kept fighting. At Bagram Air Base, the response was immediate. 2 MH-47 Chinook helicopters launched, carrying 8 additional Navy SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. They were racing toward that mountain to save 4 brothers they had never met. The Chinook came in low and fast over the mountains of Kunar province. A Taliban fighter raised a rocket, propelled grenade launcher and fired. The grenade struck the helicopter and it fell from the sky. All 16 men aboard were killed instantly. 8 Navy SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers. 16 men who launched into the dark to save 4 men they had never met. 16 men who knew the risk and went anyway. Gone in one moment. On the ground, Danny Dietz was killed in the firefight. Matthew Axelson was hit again and kept fighting until he could fight no more. Marcus Luttrell was blown off the ridge by an RPG blast and rendered unconscious, tumbling down the slope into the vegetation below. And Michael Murphy, Lieutenant Michael Patrick Murphy, 29 years old, was killed in action on June 2005 in the mountains of Afghanistan, having given everything he had, having made the call that would ultimately lead to the rescue of the one man who survived. Marcus Luttrell came back to consciousness alone at the bottom of that ravine, badly wounded, with enemy fighters moving through the forest above him. He evaded them for nearly a day until an Afghan villager named Mohammed Gulab found him and sheltered him at enormous personal risk under an ancient Pashtun code of honor. He refused to hand Luttrell over when the Taliban came demanding it. A few days later, a note Luttrell wrote reached a Marine outpost. American forces launched an extraction operation, and Marcus Luttrell came home. He told this story in a book called Lone Survivor. That book became a film. And through that film, the whole world came to know the name of Michael Murphy. On October 27, 2007, President George W. Bush presented the Medal of Honor to Dan and Maureen Murphy for their son. It was the first Medal of Honor awarded to a Navy SEAL since the Vietnam War. Dan Murphy stood at that ceremony and said, his voice breaking, "We would give back every honor to have Michael walk through the door." Michael Murphy was buried at Calverton National Cemetery on Long Island, less than 20 miles from the house where he grew up, less than 20 miles from the lake, where he spent his summers watching over strangers, making sure no one drowned, being exactly who he always was. A Navy destroyer, the USS Michael Murphy, was commissioned in 2012. A workout he designed himself is now done every Memorial Day by tens of thousands of people around the world. They call it the Murph. They do it to remember him. Michael Murphy was not a superhero. He was not a machine. He was a boy who grew up on Long Island and loved his family and loved his friends and loved his country and could not walk past someone who needed help without stopping to help them. He was a man who looked at the world and saw that there were people out there who needed protecting. And he was not built for any other life but that one. He was a leader who understood that his job was not to be the most decorated man on the mountain, but to bring his men home. And when he could not bring all of them home, he walked out into the open and took the bullets so that at least one of them might survive. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is walking out into the open when you are terrified and bleeding and you know exactly what is about to happen, and you do it anyway, because someone you love needs you to. Courage is saying thank you before you hang up the phone that cost you your life. Courage is being 29 years old and meeting the moment your whole life was building toward, without flinching, without hesitating, without looking back. Lieutenant Michael Patrick Murphy, Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Purple Heart, the first Navy Medal of Honor since Vietnam. Murph the Protector. From a little league diamond in Pacho to a mountainside in Afghanistan, he never stopped protecting the people around him. Not once. Not even at the very end. Remember that name. Say it out loud. Let it mean something. Because he walked out into the open so that the rest of us could stay safe. The least we can do is remember why.